One of the quietest shifts in a struggling neurodiverse marriage is also one of the most painful. It often happens so gradually that a woman does not recognize it while it is occurring. At first, she simply helps. She explains things more clearly. She anticipates misunderstandings. She softens social situations. She manages the emotional atmosphere of the home. She reminds, organizes, translates, prepares, protects, and adjusts. None of these actions seem significant on their own. They appear to be ordinary acts of love, patience, and partnership. Over time, however, helping can become managing, and managing can become caregiving. Laura did not realize this had happened in her marriage until a counselor asked her a simple question. The counselor leaned forward gently and asked, "What would happen if you stopped managing all of this?" Laura almost laughed because the answer seemed so obvious. Everything would fall apart. Appointments would be forgotten. Emotional issues would go unaddressed. Family tensions would increase. Holidays would become awkward. The children's needs would be missed. Important conversations would never happen. Her husband might continue functioning in his areas of strength, but the emotional life of the family would lose its center. As Laura heard herself answer, something inside her shifted. She realized she had not described a partnership. She had described a system dependent on her constant management. For years, Laura had believed she was simply being loving. When her husband forgot to respond to invitations, she handled it. When he said something blunt at a family gathering, she softened it afterward. When the children looked hurt by one of his literal comments, she explained what he probably meant. When difficult conversations needed to happen, she prepared the emotional runway so things would not explode. She did not think of this as caregiving. She thought of it as marriage. But slowly, almost invisibly, she had become the interpreter of feelings, the planner of conversations, the preventer of conflict, and the one responsible for making sure the family system kept running smoothly. Friends and relatives still saw two adults sharing a home, raising children, attending events, and functioning in daily life. They did not see the emotional labor happening behind the scenes. They did not see Laura scanning the room, anticipating reactions, translating intentions, and repairing moments no one else seemed to notice. Many women in Cassandra syndrome dynamics slowly become responsible for parts of the marriage that were meant to be shared. They may become responsible for emotional connection because their spouse does not naturally initiate it. They may become responsible for repair after conflict because their spouse does not recognize when repair is needed. They may become responsible for social navigation because their spouse misses cues or withdraws. They may become responsible for parenting nuance because their spouse approaches children in rigid, literal, or emotionally disconnected ways. They may become responsible for tracking the health of the marriage because no one else seems to be watching it. Rachel saw this clearly during her daughter's graduation weekend. For weeks, she had planned the celebration, coordinated relatives, ordered food, and kept track of everyone's schedule. She had also been quietly preparing her husband. Their daughter was anxious and emotional about the transition, and Rachel had reminded him several times that she needed encouragement, not analysis. On the morning of the party, as their daughter stood in the kitchen wearing her graduation dress, her father said, "I don't understand why everyone is making such a big deal about this. People graduate every year." Rachel watched her daughter's face fall. In an instant, she stepped in. She smiled, touched her daughter's arm, and said, "What Dad means is that he's proud of you, even if he doesn't always know how to say it in the warmest way." Her daughter nodded, but Rachel could feel the injury in the room. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Rachel sat alone in the living room and realized she had spent the entire day translating. She had translated her husband's intentions to their daughter. She had translated their daughter's emotions to her husband. She had translated social expectations, softened awkward moments, and prevented misunderstandings. What unsettled her most was not simply that she had done all of this. It was that no one had done anything like that for her. At first, taking on these roles may feel necessary if something needs to be done and no one else is doing it. A conscientious woman often steps in. She does not necessarily resent the role immediately. In fact, she may feel proud of her ability to keep things together. She may tell herself that every marriage has uneven areas and that her husband contributes in other ways. Perhaps he works hard, provides financially, handles practical tasks, or remains loyal to the family. She may view her emotional labor as her contribution to the partnership. The difficulty emerges when contribution becomes compensation. Jennifer admired many things about her husband. He was excellent with finances, careful with money, and dependable in practical matters. He could solve complex problems, repair almost anything in the house, and remain calm in situations that overwhelmed other people. Friends often told her how lucky she was to have such a responsible husband. Jennifer believed that too, at least in part. She knew he had strengths. She knew he cared about the family. She knew he was not cruel or reckless. But one night, after a painful argument, Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed and asked herself a question she had avoided for years. If I collapsed emotionally right now, who would take care of me? The answer came quickly and painfully. No one. Her husband might ask what she needed him to do. He might want instructions. He might feel bad that she was hurting. But he would not naturally move toward her with comfort, tenderness, and emotional presence. He would not know how to hold her pain without trying to correct it, explain it, defend against it, or escape from it. Jennifer realized that what she missed was not effort in a general sense. It was being emotionally accompanied. This is one of the most confusing parts of the caregiver dynamic. A spouse can be highly capable in many areas and still rely heavily on his wife to manage the emotional and relational world of the marriage. The same person who can succeed professionally, solve technical problems, provide practical stability, or remain loyal for decades may struggle to recognize emotional cues, repair relational ruptures, or respond to his wife's inner world with warmth and attunement. Because the contrast is so striking, many women struggle to make sense of it. They wonder how someone can be so competent in one domain and so limited in another. They wonder whether he truly cannot understand or simply does not care. They wonder whether they are being unfair by expecting more. They wonder whether the emotional gap is something they should simply accept. These questions can become painful loops. Meanwhile, daily life continues, and the wife keeps carrying the load. Beth noticed the pattern most clearly during holidays. Every year she purchased the gifts, remembered dietary restrictions, coordinated travel plans, and anticipated which relatives needed extra sensitivity. Before gatherings, she found herself coaching her husband as if preparing him for a social performance. She reminded him not to comment on his sister's parenting. She asked him to inquire about his father's health. She warned him that if her mother brought up politics, it would be better to change the subject than to argue. At first, she approached these conversations lightly. She almost joked about them. By the 15th year of marriage, however, Beth realized she was rehearsing him before every family event. She no longer walked into gatherings feeling like a wife enjoying connection with loved ones. She walked in as a crisis prevention specialist. Her body stayed tense. Her eyes tracked everyone's facial expressions. Her mind anticipated what could go wrong. She watched for offense, confusion, irritation, and hurt. She left gatherings exhausted even when nothing dramatic had happened, because the absence of disaster had required her constant vigilance. This kind of emotional labor is often invisible because it does not look like work. There may be no paycheck, no checklist, no obvious product at the end of the day. Yet the labor is real. It requires attention, memory, empathy, timing, emotional intelligence, and constant decision-making. It drains the nervous system even when nobody else notices. Over time, many women realize they no longer feel like wives. They feel like coaches, counselors, translators, mothers, managers, and emotional interpreters. They still love their spouses, but the role they occupy in the marriage has changed. They find themselves preparing their husbands for conversations, explaining other people's feelings, giving instructions about how to respond, and quietly managing the consequences when those instructions are not followed. When they need emotional support themselves, there is often no one there in the same way. That imbalance creates grief that can be difficult to name. Partnership includes mutual leaning. There are seasons when one spouse needs more support than the other. Illness, grief, job loss, parenting demands, and personal crises can temporarily shift the balance. Healthy marriages allow for those seasons. One person may carry more for a while, and later the other may do the same. The problem arises when the imbalance becomes permanent, and one spouse is always the emotional caregiver while rarely receiving care in return. This lack of reciprocity becomes especially painful during crisis. A wife may be able to manage ordinary loneliness for years, but when life becomes hard, the absence of partnership becomes undeniable. She may face illness, grief, career stress, parenting struggles, or family emergencies and discover that she still has to manage her spouse's reactions while also coping with her own pain. Michelle discovered this after her father died unexpectedly. In the first days after his death, she desperately needed comfort. She imagined being held while she cried. She imagined someone noticing when she had not eaten. She imagined being able to fall apart without explaining what falling apart meant. Instead, she found herself coaching her husband through her grief. She told him not to offer solutions. She asked him to sit beside her. She reminded him that silence was acceptable. When he became uncomfortable with her tears and retreated into practical tasks, she reassured him that he was trying. Weeks later, sitting in therapy, Michelle said something that broke her own heart. "My father died," she whispered, "and somehow I was still taking care of everyone else." The devastation in her voice was not only grief over her father. It was grief over the loneliness of needing support from someone who required instruction on how to support her and still could not offer it in a way that reached her heart. Many women respond to this loneliness by becoming more self-sufficient. They stop expecting their spouse to provide emotional support. They build private coping systems. They talk to friends, therapists, support groups, or no one at all. They develop inner resilience. They become capable, composed, and efficient. On the surface, they may appear strong. Beneath the surface, they may be grieving the fact that they had to become strong in ways marriage was supposed to soften. Self-sufficiency can be empowering when it is chosen freely. It can be heartbreaking when it becomes necessary because partnership is absent. The caregiver dynamic also affects desire. Many women feel guilt or confusion when physical intimacy becomes difficult. They may still care about their spouse, they may still appreciate his good qualities, yet their bodies begin resisting closeness. They wonder why affection feels strained or why desire has faded. Often the answer lies not in a lack of love, but in the collapse of adult-to-adult partnership. Samantha loved her husband and respected him deeply. He was loyal, hardworking, and sincere. He never abandoned the family, never wasted money, and never deliberately tried to hurt her. Yet she found herself recoiling from physical intimacy. She felt ashamed of this. She wondered whether something was wrong with her. She wondered why she could care about him and still not want closeness. As she began looking more honestly at the structure of their relationship, the answer became clearer. Throughout the day, she reminded him about responsibilities, coached him through parenting moments, managed his reactions to conflict, anticipated social mistakes, and absorbed the emotional fallout when things went poorly. By bedtime, she did not experience him primarily as a partner. She experienced him as someone for whom she felt responsible. "I feel more like his case manager than his wife," she said quietly. That sentence carried both shame and relief. It sounded harsh to her, but it also named something true. Her loss of desire was not evidence that she was cold or defective. It was information. Her body was responding to the relational structure of the marriage. Romantic desire often struggles to survive when one partner consistently feels like the emotional adult, and the other feels like someone who must be managed. This does not mean love is absent. It does not mean the spouse has no good qualities. It does not mean the marriage is beyond repair. It means the body may be protesting a role the mind has been trying to tolerate. For women trying to decide whether to stay or leave, recognizing the caregiver dynamic is essential. The question is not whether she is willing to help her spouse. Love often includes helping. The deeper question is whether the marriage allows her to be helped too. Can she be vulnerable without becoming responsible for managing his response? Can she need comfort without having to teach it from scratch every time? Can she express pain without becoming the caretaker of his defensiveness? Can she rest inside the relationship, or does the relationship itself require constant management? These questions are difficult because they reveal the difference between being loved in theory and feeling cared for in practice. A husband may sincerely love his wife and still be unable or unwilling to provide the kind of emotional partnership she needs. That distinction matters. Love that does not translate into care may leave a woman painfully conflicted. She may believe in his love while still feeling profoundly alone. She may know he would never intentionally abandon her while still experiencing emotional abandonment. She may recognize his loyalty while grieving the absence of attunement. Two truths can coexist. He may not mean to place her in the caregiver role. She may still be living there. For some couples, naming this dynamic becomes the beginning of change. After years of defensiveness, one husband finally listened as his wife described the invisible labor she had carried. Instead of arguing with her perception or explaining why she was exaggerating, he became curious. He asked her what he was not seeing. That question did not fix everything, but it opened a door. Together, they began identifying responsibilities he had unconsciously outsourced to her. He began learning to initiate repair after conflict instead of waiting for her to reopen the conversation. He started asking how she was doing emotionally rather than assuming she would tell him if something was wrong. He took more responsibility for tracking family relationships instead of leaving all social and emotional maintenance to her. The changes were awkward at first. Sometimes they sounded scripted. Sometimes he forgot. Sometimes she still felt the old exhaustion rise in her body. But because he was willing to keep learning, the marriage slowly began to feel less one-sided. His wife did not need perfection. She needed participation. She needed evidence that she was no longer the only one carrying the emotional life of the relationship. For other couples, naming the dynamic changes very little. Karen explained her exhaustion many times. Her husband apologized. For a few weeks, he tried harder. Then, life returned to its familiar rhythm. She resumed reminding, planning, translating, preventing, repairing, and absorbing. The marriage continued functioning because she continued functioning. Everyone praised her resilience. Very few people noticed the cost. Eventually, Karen had to ask herself a question she could no longer avoid. Is this relationship truly improving, or have I simply become better at holding it together? That question was painful, but it was also clarifying. A wife was never meant to become the entire nervous system of the marriage. She was never meant to be the only one tracking emotional safety, repair, connection, and growth. She was never meant to disappear into the role of translator, manager, and caretaker, while calling that disappearance love. Healthy love makes room for both people. It allows both partners to need, both partners to grow, both partners to rest, both partners to take responsibility, and both partners to be human. If a woman recognizes herself in this chapter, the invitation is not to condemn her spouse. The invitation is to tell the truth about the role she has been living in. She may have adapted to it for so long that it feels normal. She may have built an entire life around compensating for what is missing. She may feel guilty for admitting how tired she is. She may worry that naming the imbalance means she is being unfair, disloyal, or cruel. But exhaustion is information. Resentment is information. Loss of desire is information. Loneliness is information. The caregiver role may have helped the marriage survive, but survival is not the same as partnership. A woman standing at this crossroads must eventually ask not only whether the marriage can continue, but whether it can become mutual enough for her to remain whole within it. That question deserves honesty. It deserves compassion, and it deserves to be answered not from guilt or habit, but from the truth of what her life has actually become.
Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you. Hey guys, this is Mark. Some of you may not know that I have a lot of books on Amazon. So if you like my videos, you'll like my books. I have several for ASD spouses, for NT spouses, and for the neurodiverse couple. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this link. Feel free to click on that link and see what's available. I'm sure you'll find something that applies to you. So if you're struggling in your neurodiverse marriage, help is available, one click away.